Okay, we're live. Mr. Anderson? Ms. Capel?
Here.
Mr. McDade?
Here.
Ms. McNatt?
Here.
Mr. Norton? Mr. O'Connell?
Here.
Ms. Ray?
Here.
And Ms. Stubblefield?
Here.
You have quorum.
All right, and we've been asked to approve the minutes from the July 1st meeting, which is on the second page. So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Good, or do you need to call the roll? Good, or do you need to call?
That's
the roll?
good, no, that's good.
Okay.
Affirmation's good for that.
Any citizen comments?
Yes.
Okay. Just 3 minutes.
I need to get you on the speaker.
If you would, please. It is recording.
3 minutes? Is that okay? John McFarland, I live at 1780 Shelby Circle in Charleston. I want to tell you that I watched the July meeting on YouTube, so I have some idea what you talked about last time. I only have 3 minutes. I want to focus on the survey. You've probably seen the survey that's being suggested. I haven't, but these are ideas that I'd like to mention to you. First of all, when you survey the hospitality workers, I like the idea about, that was mentioned last time about full-time employees. I suggest you consider full-time, maybe 30 or 32 hours, considering the kind of people that work here. And while you're doing the survey, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea if you asked these employers how much parking they need during the day. So when you make this report to the city council, you can mention those too, because I'm hoping that you'll focus most of your attention on housing for the city employees. But I think it would be nice if the city knew how much housing they needed for the workforce housing and parking, and maybe you could focus, the city could at least try to get some decent parking. The other survey for public safety is important because if you don't know how much housing you need, there's no way to be able to plan. So that's a big deal. I am a landlord. I have 4 long-term rentals already. And if you sent me a question and we wanted to survey, for instance, my annual or monthly rate, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, I also suggest you ask about the HVAC systems, whether they have those in windows. It'll give you an idea how old the property is. And the square footage and the rental rate per month. Frankly, if you send me that letter and ask me, I'm not sure I want to send it back to you because I consider some of this sort of proprietary. My suggestion to you is when you send me the letter, you also send me 4 postcards so I can write down from each one of my units exactly these questions, put down the information and send it to you anonymously. I know that's 105 postcards or whatever, or how many people there are, but I think you will get a more accurate survey. I'm probably not the only person that doesn't want to actually divulge how much they pay, whether it's high or low. Mine are probably low, but I still don't think you have a right to see all that stuff. So think about that when you do the survey. I'm probably just about out of time. I think you should focus on city employees. And I made a proposal in 2017 as to how to do this. And if you haven't seen that proposal, you should at least read it to give you an idea of how you might be able to do that. And if I have another few seconds, the only problem with doubling down on density is trying to figure out whether or not you're going to do any harm to the environment. If we're going to add some extra housing in the single family for the special pilot program, the question should be, who uses the most water? An ISTR with 5 or 6 bedrooms, or a single family who's got a garage apartment for a police employee? That information is available to you through the water department. And if you can solve that problem and say it's less than these people, then it would be easier to convince the city council, the mayor, and the general public that this is a good idea. I think we're done.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Okay, I don't have to go over there. Now I'll introduce our speaker. I have a friend who works in the zoning department for the city of Charleston, so I reached out to her and asked, who should I be asking to come speak to this committee about affordable housing? And within seconds, she suggested Gianna Shaw Johnson, Ms. Johnson is an employee of the City of Charleston. She's the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development there. She has a presentation for you, and then she'll also be available to answer questions.
At least I hope so. Sounds like the gentleman that just sat down might have the answers though. So thank you all for the opportunity to be with you this evening. Always good to share information. We believe in best practices, meaning if we have some idea of what's working in our community, we're glad to share it with other communities. So we don't want to recreate the wheel, as they say. So Jenna made it clear that it was a 7 p.m. start time, and I said, oh my God, close to my bedtime, kidding. But anyway, glad to be here with you this evening. As you all know, Mayor Cogswell is now our mayor of the City of Charleston, and he likes to say he's still drinking from the fire hose, but he's doing a really good job so far. So a little bit about the Department of Housing and Community Development. We are one of 14 departments in the City of Charleston. Our mission is to facilitate the creation of affordable and workforce housing, preserve existing housing through 3 rehabilitation programs, create wealth opportunities through our first-time home buyer program, or home ownership program is defined here, provide housing and related services to the unsheltered and vulnerable in the Charleston community, as well as administer federal, state, and local funding. And those funding sources, and I have to remind my staff not to use acronyms, it's so hard not to do that, but federal dollars include the Community Development Block Grant Funds, Home Investment Partnership Program funds, housing opportunities with persons with AIDS, as well as other funding sources that we have pursued and attained all around this issue of housing creation and preservation. That's a little snapshot of my staff. I think a few more have been added since then, but that gives you a sense of who we are. It's about 14 to 15 of us in the Department of Housing and Community Development. We support what we call a spectrum of housing, literally everything from your homeless shelters. We've given to that annually as far back as Mayor Riley being in service, so that's been a number of years. Transitional housing is one that the federal government does not support very strongly now, but we find it critical for those that are unsheltered and homeless because it absolutely gives them a place to get off of the street. Public housing are those that are managed by your public housing authorities, and I would just say public housing authorities manage public housing, but in many cases they also have private housing, especially the City of Charleston. Theirs is literally located throughout the City of Charleston itself. Then what we call permanent multifamily rental housing is anything really permanent. Permanent from the standpoint of typically there is an affordability restriction, excuse me, or covenant that is attached to that housing, as little as 20 years, sometimes as long as 90. I'll talk about that more later on. And then fair market rental housing, which is essentially housing that is priced at the market levels, and then of course home ownership or for sale housing. And even though I'm from Charleston, I talk fast, but y'all, if you need me to stop at any point, I'm glad to do that. So some of the information I have, or I'm presenting to you this evening, is straight from our comprehensive plan that was done last year. And I think, honestly, those are the more recent pieces of data, although we are pulling some from specific places. Today, 42% of Charleston's households are cost burden. And I think Jenna may have had that term in some of the information she's presented to you previously. It essentially means they're paying more than 30% of their income on either rent or on their mortgage. And so that's essentially what 30% means. That term has come from the federal government. It also is associated with your private sector financing, because typically your financiers don't want to have you pay more than 3 times your income in a mortgage. And so one of the things that is pointed out here, neighborhoods with the majority of blacks or African Americans are more than twice as likely to be cost burdened. What you see here on the screen gives you a sense of, in the City of Charleston, what's happening West Ashley, Peninsula, which is downtown, Johns Island, James Island, a portion of King Hoy Peninsula, is also city and then citywide. And so, yes, we, like many other areas in our community, have challenges when it comes to cost burden households. The other challenges that many communities across our state and nation, thank you, I appreciate that. Household incomes often are not keeping up with the cost of housing costs. As you all know, we've seen a rise in housing costs, especially over the last 3 to 4 years. COVID exacerbated some of the costs that we're seeing with the cost of construction, the lack of supplies that are available. So it caused a ripple effect that did not affect us in a positive way. And so many times we have seen that prices increased at 54% while income was at 31%. So naturally, it creates a gap. And so then the question becomes, how is that gap filled? And so oftentimes, persons like yourself and other elected officials have to grapple with that, bring in folks and look at strategies that might enable us to address that. For your information, this is the income ranges that we look at when we're determining who we can assist. So literally, the area median income for the city of Charleston, when you look at a family of 4 making 80% of the area median income, that family makes $84,100. Now, my planner friends would say, Gianna, that may be true, but when we look at incomes in our community, they aren't actually there. And so how do we help them when they're trying to buy housing? And so one of the things we do is we look at subsidy, we look at first-time home buyer programs, we look at financial packages with banks so that they can give lesser interest rate. There are strategies that are deployed in order to address that. And I will just say, when I saw these numbers and I saw a family of 4 at 100% of the area median income making $105,000, I was like, oh my God, we will never be able to get people in housing, but it's happening. And we're doing things that are working at the level we want, absolutely not. But we are still pressing forward to ensure that home ownership happens as well as rental. And I do have some handouts, so before I leave, I'd like to share that with the commission. You can go to the next slide. So as our planning team in the city looked at our comprehensive plan, and I said last year, that was actually late 21, early 22, when City Council approved the comprehensive plan. As you all know, that's done every 10 years. And so what they shared with us is they did an analysis of the housing component, is that we needed 16,351 units by the end of the decade, or by 2030, essentially.
That was more? You need that many more, or you need total?
Total. More than what we have now.
Yeah.
In addition to that, so you lead me right into my next statement, based on the incomes of the current population, based on that analysis, there were 7,000 low-income housing units that are needed just to meet the existing need. And so when we think about low income, we think about those persons that make 50% or below the area median income. Can you go back to that chart right quick for me? So 30% is the first column here. And so you're looking at a household of one that might make $22,000 a year. And so typically that's the range when we're talking about extremely low. Very low are those that are making 50% and below that area median income number. So when you hear that, that's essentially what folks are talking about. Right now in the city of Charleston, and honestly I think this particular slide's a little old, but we have approximately 5,400 existing affordable homes in the city of Charleston. Oftentimes that is referred to now as naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAH. When I first heard that term, I giggled because I thought, is there anything naturally occurring right now in the city of Charleston? If we aren't creating it, there are ways to preserve housing, but those are our numbers as far as housing that exists right now that are affordable. There are approximately 1,600 units proposed or committed through our planned unit development. So we are continuing, despite some of the challenges I mentioned, to facilitate the development of housing through PUDs and other ways. City Planning Department, along with our department, mine, created what we call a dashboard so we could remain abreast of all that we're doing, literally from start to finish. One of the other reasons we wanted to create the dashboard is because we have began the implementation of an expedited review process. So we're actually challenging ourselves to see how quickly we can get developments from commencement to actually going vertical and then get a certificate of occupancy. And I would just say, y'all don't look at us right now because we're still struggling just slightly to fine tune that, but we are moving forward in the right direction. Next slide. So here are a few examples of what I call our first time home ownership. And I think these were the last ones. We have about 14 or more going up right now. 10 of those are attached townhomes, 3 are scattered site. But essentially, we have under our first time home ownership initiative a process by which we engage private sector developers or nonprofit developers. The city has typically acquired the land or a parcel, and we transfer that land and that parcel via a development agreement to that entity, and they have to produce housing for us. And so in this case, this is in what we call the East Side neighborhood. 6 of these cute little, I wanted to say townhomes, but these are single family detached homes are built. These are 2.5 baths, 2 bedrooms, I think. We call that Father Grant's Court. And so the city probably invested in subsidy about $85,000 per each one of those houses. And we did that in order to ensure that gap I talked about earlier, to ensure that that subsidy existed so that those who were interested in purchasing could do that. And what does that essentially mean? They still have to qualify for a mortgage. We are making it easier for them to remain in their homes if they desire by putting subsidy in. The interesting part about these homes are, and people stare at me really intently when I say that, these have 90-year restrictive covenants on it, meaning that these homes can only be sold to people in the 50 to 120% income range. The investment of that subsidy that we make follows each individual. We have what we call a transfer agreement. And that subsidy follows that individual every time that house is sold. So if I bought it, I would get the benefit of that $80,000. If you bought it, you would get the benefit of that $80,000. And essentially what that does is reduce the amount of first mortgage that that individual has to pursue. So it increases the likelihood of home ownership for folks who haven't owned it before. Under our program for the first time home buyer program, you cannot have owned a home in 3 years, or there's some other tragic situation that may occur, death or divorce, that enables you to come back to a program considered first-time home ownership. This is another example. This happens to be a rental development. One of the things, and I thought I had it before the pictures, but anyway, pictures keep everybody interested in what I'm talking about. One of the things that's critical for us as we develop both rental and for sale housing is money and partnership. Naturally, and I'll cover it before I'm done here, there are other factors that contribute to that, but the key for us is those partners that can bring to bear these types of development within a specified period of time, and then any incentives and additional cash that the city might have in order to invest in making that happen. In this case, this is what we call an affordable housing, low-income housing tax credit development. This is in the West Ashley community, beautifully designed, and I will just say there are no exceptions to design requirements from affordable to market rate in the city. Everybody goes through the same grueling process. It can be quite grueling. Bulls Creek is the name of this one. $16 million development cost. The city invested about $2.6 million in we call bond funds, and I'll mention those to you later when we talk about funding opportunities that help these things come to fruition. Next one. This is another more recently built on Peninsula Charleston. This is what we refer to as the James Lewis Jr. Apartments. This is actually named after a city council member that was on council at one point. This was actually built on where we removed the old Ravenel Bridge from. So a portion of that land these are built upon. So this was quite interesting because the city also, in addition to bond funds, invested TIF funds because the infrastructure at this particular site was a little bit more expensive than what you see normally because there were pilings underneath the ground because the bridges spans were moved from this particular site. But this again is another opportunity of rental housing in the community. This was funded through, majority of those funds came from low-income housing tax credit developments, but again, if you notice, the city put about $7.5 million both between the bond and the TIF funds. And I'll make y'all laugh because I remind my city council members of this. When we first introduced this idea and we brought a development team in, that was many years ago, but they were indicating that it would cost $15 million. And my real estate committee said, Gianna, it just could not be that we have to pay $15 million for affordable rental housing, and so it did not get approved. Well, unfortunately, about 7 to 8 years later, we paid $28 million to have rental housing approved. In the case of this development, especially where city land is involved, because there was an investment of city land, the city enters into what we call an option to lease and a ground lease, which essentially means that the developer who built this owns it or rents it from the city for 60 years, so it'll be affordable for 60 years. At the end of that time frame, the city gets both the land and the improvements back. So the city can continue providing this housing for perpetuity if it chooses, or whatever it deems most appropriate for that time. This is another smaller development. One of the things that we find is many of our churches and other faith-based partners have land. Sometimes they have houses and they don't know what to do with them. Oftentimes they lack the technical assistance. We have engaged an organization called Pastors Inc. They helped New Israel Reform Episcopal Church, who owned, this was vacant property on this particular site, and we invested our Home Investment Partnership Program funds, which are federal dollars, $250,000. The overall cost was $1 million. Again, these are rental opportunities, and I think 4 or more total in this particular development. Because it takes a little bit more hand-holding and we don't have staff capacity to do that, we worked with a nonprofit group to basically help the church get this done. The church is the recipient of the funding, the rental income that comes from that, so then they can invest it accordingly in other pieces of land or however they deem appropriate, other ministries that they might have. So they can be a little onerous about getting it done, but at the end of the day, they're always happy when it comes to fruition. Next one, please. What I have for you here are the various funding sources that we use in order to facilitate the development of housing. The bond funding was actually a GEO bond fund that the residents of the city of Charleston approved back in 2017. So it's taken us 5 or more years to really bring those to fruition. A lot of that was hampered by what state housing did or the changes they made to the regulations governing the low-income housing tax credit. So there are more housing to come, but the bond funds typically allow for a lot of flexibility. Developers are consistently asking me now, Gianna, when are y'all going to do another bond allocation? Naturally, it's not up to me, but the citizens, I think that was one of those items that were on the agenda that received like 80% of the vote of support from our community. Settlement funds were involved. The city was involved in a lawsuit where we were able to get about $10 million. We invested that in housing and are, in fact, getting a return on some of those dollars. So in some instances, we invest money as a deferred loan or deferred forgivable loan based on what is going on with the strategy of that particular development. And the idea is that we have money revolving back so that we can invest it again. Then there is what we call our fee in lieu funding. That comes, Jenna, from our mixed-use workforce zoning ordinance. Essentially, developers opt into a particular zoning. They're required to build a certain number of affordable units on site. If they don't, they have to pay us a fee. And so we have probably garnered over the last 10 years about $12 million in the fee and lieu fund. And so it has enabled the city to both acquire land and subsidize construction of other properties in many cases. So it's, again, a nice way to have a coffer of non-federal funds that enables you to do the work that is required. Program income funds are those funds, again, that revolve back to us. Often those are associated with our federal funds. And again, usually there is a note and mortgage in everything that we do. And so it's just a matter of whether we have funding rolling back to us or the nature of that project is such that we have granted those funds. But what the note and mortgage is important because it ensures that they carry out what we've intended. And if they don't, then there's another challenge that we have to face, usually successfully. Tax increment finance funding, the TIF funding, I guess it's been 3 to 5 years ago, state legislators allowed us to utilize TIF funding for affordable housing. That was not always the case, but we're glad that we're able to do that now because it allows for infrastructure costs to be paid as well as construction costs. So that can be very helpful when you're putting these deals together. ATAX funds are ones that they just approved. This is 24, maybe last year, if not late 22. Accommodations tax funding, which is real important for our community. And so some communities have already secured those. We are literally just finalizing our proposal to state housing. And I believe we will receive approximately $2 million from that. My CFO is changing that number a little on me, but the idea again is that will go towards either acquisition or construction of housing in our community. And then I mentioned the LIHTC or Low Income Housing Tax Credit. That is administered by the State Housing Finance and Development Authority. So they're out of Columbia. They manage probably 10 or more sources of funds, and they help to facilitate development throughout the state of South Carolina. Federal funds, state funds, and Governor McMaster actually appoints the board for state housing, but they help create housing and have probably done well over 50,000 units across our community. The other grants, as I mentioned previously, are federal dollars. The ARPA funding that came in a couple of years ago was also helpful in facilitating both the construction and, where necessary, the subsidy of housing. And then the federal government also offers what they refer to as a Section 108 loan that is secured by your CDBG dollars. And so those are some of the opportunities. There are also foundations that provide funding for housing. So there are many opportunities, if you will, to secure funding that enables housing to be completed in your communities. So low-income housing tax credits, I've mentioned that. They come in what they call 4% or 9%, very competitive. And I would just say it's moving in the right direction. The goals and strategies around LIHTC are always a challenge for developers because it's very competitive and they have a limited amount of funding. And so we're always having conversations with them on how we can make those better. They're very critical to the development of rental housing, especially for your low-income families. And here are examples of developments that the city has invested funding in. In these particular, the two at the top are senior developments in the West Ashley and Daniel Island community. And then the one below is a more recent one that was just open. It's an old school, so it's what we call an adaptive reuse. A school that they had to leave the center of that building. They couldn't tear it down because we are a city that honors historic buildings. And so they maintained that one and then they built new all around it. So essentially 88 units of senior housing at this site. And they go from 30% to 80% of what we call the area median income and supplying that housing to those individuals. Unbelievably, that senior rental housing costs about 42 million. So oftentimes, they call it the lasagna of sources of funds. It took about 10 sources of funds in order to get us to the Archer redevelopment. Well worth it if you all are ever downtown and can go by. It's a beautiful building. You go in, inside, the windows are very large. The seniors that have moved in can't stop talking about it. So it's a really nice opportunity there. And I think that's all. One other thing that we've done, again, always trying to find a way to help facilitate funding for housing, is we are working with a nonprofit organization to establish what we call a Palmetto Impact Fund. And that's basically just a way where they can take private capital and we leverage it with the money that we invest, either from TIF, from federal dollars, or from other sources. And essentially, this group works with employers in the community. They work with private investors in the community to, again, bring forth an additional source of capital that we can use as leverage towards investing in the various deals. With impact funds, I will say some of those funds need to be returned fairly quickly, based on, of course, the nature of the deal. With affordable housing and workforce housing, we often share that patient capital is of utmost importance when you're putting these deals together. I think that's it. So, finally, how do you secure rental housing or any housing in your community? Of course, determine how many rental homes are needed. Assessments are always good to have. There have been a number of assessments done by state housing, by Charleston County. The city has done some, and so it's always important to have that data before you, so you know what you have to encounter. Identify land or available locations for the construction of the homes. Ensure land is zoned appropriately for the development. Determine what your estimated cost for constructing rental homes are, or any homes. And that's where your development partners come in. One of the things I am excited about that I do well is I know how to contact those with the appropriate talent to get us where we need to be. And so that's always important, having those collaborative partnerships. For the city, being a local government, typically we are doing requests for proposals, a request for qualifications. Literally on every deal that we've ever done, that has been the process for us. And establishing, again, those collaborative partnerships. The Archer deal was done by Humanities Foundation, so we have a number of partners. Charleston Habitat for Humanity works with us. Sea Island Habitat works with us, so a number of partners are important to being able to achieve your goal. Naturally engaging and informing your community and council. We know that that's very important to secure that input. And everything we do is executed via a development agreement or some level of a contractual agreement, even when there are monetary contributions, or especially when monetary contributions are involved. And I want to think that's my last one? Yes. So any questions that you have for me? And I know I went through that very quickly, but
Yes.
I wanted to share as much as I could.
Has the city had any success with existing property owners transitioning to affordable housing?
We've had some of that. We do have what we call a rental rehab program, so your smaller, what we call our smaller developers, the ones and twos, they may own a duplex or a townhome. We would invest, and we do this through our federal home funding, about $20,000 per unit, and we ask them to allow those things to be affordable for about 20 years. And that's a grant, that's actually grant funding that they don't pay back, but it goes towards the, quote, reconstruction or rehab of those
Lump
units.
sum with
Usually
agreement?
they have to get some additional funding,
Mhm.
and so along with their bank financing, we will put it in towards the middle and the end of the reconstruction.
Okay.
But we do execute the grant agreement up front, because it's often helpful for them if they've had to secure private financing to have that additional $20,000 available to them. So yes.
Gianna, so that's for a property that needs to be rehabbed a bit and then turn it into a rental. Have you had any programming with property owners, just incentivizing property owners to use existing properties that don't really need to be rehabilitated or renovated to turn them into long-term rentals? And like, how does, if you
We-
did, how did
We
you
have
pass
not
it?
had that much. The closest that we've come to that is ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, where they can use a portion of their home and/or they can build a separate unit on their land. And so our planning team is tweaking those guidelines just slightly. They've had good success with ADUs in Mount Pleasant. And so we have copied, if you will, what they're doing just slightly to see if we can move that forward in Charleston.
Is it similar, like a 20-year restriction on it, or is it just?
It is. Actually, we want a
As long as you
little
keep it.
longer, and that's kind of why we're having to go back and tweak it,
Yeah.
because folk didn't like that real long time, because they said if they sell their home or they want to leave, then they put a burden on the next person to do what they did, and that may not work. And so that was one of the other reasons we kind of drew that one back and are revisiting the language. The affordability covenant is essentially what we call that, to maybe come where we do only 15 or 10 based on our investment. Other questions?
Any other strategies in the works besides new construction? Because, you know, we're,
We're limited.
we can't. do
Sure. So, one of the things we've been fortunate to do, and I think Mayor Coswell just started working with, the Bloomberg Associates out of New York. They, Michael Bloomberg, what they call Bloomberg Philanthropies, pays for an association of literal consultants. Some of them have worked in local government, some of them have been in the consulting field. They cover like 9 different areas, including housing. We're literally working with them right now for free, which is the really amazing part, because you get that kind of expertise coming in, and we don't have to pay them because it's provided through the philanthropy. They're looking right now for us at housing, how we fund housing for the long term, and what those alternative sources might be in order to get us to a certain point. That 16,351 number that's out there, I keep telling my planners, that's not our goal, that's just what they said we needed. So looking specifically at a goal and what we can realistically achieve over the next 4 to 5 years. So once, if I get some more juicy information, I'll be glad to share it with you that you can pass on. I will say sometimes banks will help with certain aspects of it because they get community revitalization CRA credits when they're able to invest funding in housing. And so oftentimes engaging the banking community on the front end is always helpful, because if they can do or help to facilitate loans at lower cost, there is a credit that they get as a result of what they call giving back to the community. So that's another source as well.
On the ADUs, did you have, like, work with environmentalists just to assure environmental impact before you add more density or more?
Yes. One of the challenges with ADUs initially for the city was parking and making sure that the impact to neighborhoods was not worse than when we started with that process. We looked at ADUs a couple of different times, and so studying that, one of the things that the homeowner or the property owner would be required to do is make sure that there was appropriate parking in their yard or very close to their yard, so that it would not have an adverse impact in the community itself. So that was one of those other harder spots with that one.
In general, with the units that you do have that have been constructed, it seems like most that I've seen are pretty, like, 1 bedroom, or do you see?
The sizes vary, so in those multi-unit developments, especially those that are funded by LIHTC, in some cases they have larger bedroom sizes. And some of the senior developments, they might be anything from 1 to 2s. We've also worked, and I think those are no longer affordable, we worked with the developer early on that did loft style, and they went very quickly. But the affordability covenants on those were only 10 years, and so those have since gone from the affordable realm into the market rate realm. But as I understand it, those are very popular in downtown Charleston. Yeah.
I just wonder about what we can do in that many working families certainly would need.
Sure, and what I
Bringing
intended
four
to do, and
bedrooms.
I'll get this information to you, the city instituted an employer-assisted housing program.
Oh, I
And
would love
essentially, we provide a low-interest loan. One is a low-interest loan, one is a grant to employees who buy in the city. We also worked very closely under that employer-assisted housing program with employers to encourage them to invest. One in particular, a restaurant owner, I remember one of his team members was one of the first ones that bought under the employer-assisted program. I think he gave from $2,000 to $3,000 towards the reduction of his mortgage. He had some criteria of his own too. I think they had to be with his business at least 3 years and those sorts of things. But it was a good way to encourage, one, employees to stay with him once they all found out. And then two, it was an opportunity for an employer to, I guess, be the best case scenario, if you will, for some other employers. And so we've in fact talked to the chamber about that to see if they can encourage more employers to do that. Because if we can get them involved, even get our hospitals and other entities involved in the process, we feel like we'd have greater success.
That's great. And you guys post website or updates on your website?
I
Pretty
will say yes to
often, or-
that. That is not my bailiwick.
Okay.
But I know people who do that. So, yes, but I will get my team member who manages that, to get Jenna that information on that employer-assisted housing, to share that with you all, because that might be a methodology you're interested in using.
Sure is.
Okay?
Your presentation was great, thank you. And it
You're
also
welcome. Thank
kind
you
of,
all.
one, it was enlightening and reinforced how complicated it is.
It
And
is.
also just a matrix of needs and funding sources and how do you make the decisions. And so it was encouraging to know there's so many different programs and funding sources that you've been able to tap and sort of hodgepodge together for different needs.
And I will just say, if you collaborate with the appropriate development community, there are folks that not only bring the expertise with construction, but they know this stuff with their eyes closed. Tammy Hoy is one that I think of. She can help you put together a plan fairly quickly. Tammy Wilson, not all my Tammys tonight, but anyway, those two come to mind right away because they know how to help governments and other organizations put together plans that can help bring this thing to fruition.
So they work for you?
They do not.
Oh.
Actually, Tammy Hoy did work for me at one point. But I'll send you, if you'll email me and just say, Gianna, who'd you say? Yeah. And then I'll send you their information. Yeah, but they're good people to work with. Y'all stay in there. It's really important that you all do what you're doing. It'll make a big difference for your community too.
I think the other thing too, because we're seeing so much good work that you've done, and we probably don't know how long it took to get there. In my mind, I'm having a hard time with getting over the hump to get started, and I think just do something first to get going.
For
So I don't
sure.
know how long it took, 20, 30, 50 years, I don't know.
It varied. I started when I was really young. But seriously, it varies based on a number of things. Funding is so critical. And the other process that's really important is entitlement. I.e., in some cases, I think about James Lewis Jr., we probably started talking about that one 7 years ago. And so that's why the city is now looking at how long does it take, and I said this to Mayor Cogswell when he came in. I said, you will never hear someone say it took Gianna a long time to make a decision, because it doesn't. But once they get beyond me, we have the stormwater considerations, which are critically important. There's the building envelope, and if it's in a Board of Architectural Review district, it's gonna take a little longer. So all of those different criteria we have in the city, we're trying to make sure that those don't become a hindrance or a barrier to us getting housing up in a faster way. Because the longer it takes, the more money it costs, and so then it becomes cost prohibitive. And so in some cases, we've actually lost deals. They've either gone to the market rate, or the developer said, I can't carry this any longer, and they cut it off, which makes sense, right? Because they're in that business to make money as well. And so if it doesn't work, then it becomes prohibitive to the community long-term. And so we are studying that very closely now to see how we can fine-tune that and make that better.
For bond funding, you said that one was one of the more well-received
Yes.
forms. What are some of the obstacles that you have, what are some of the issues that have come up with bond
With-
funding?
Actually none, as it relates to actually utilizing it and then getting it to the development community. Most of the funding sources that we manage, we do what we call a request for applications, meaning they have to submit a deal to us in order to facilitate it. GO bond basically goes against the funding that the city has on hand, because the city is then responsible for paying that money back. And so my CFO has looked at me nicely the last time I mentioned a GO bond fund, because I think when we did the first one, it was 20 million back in 2017. I was asking for about 40 then. And so we're looking now to see if that's going to be possible in light of the full financial picture for the city, because the onus is on the city to repay those bond funds. So that's probably one of the drawbacks.
And how they get renewed each year, or
Well, and how, so once the funding itself is allocated, then the city has a responsibility for paying that back, essentially to itself, really.
Right.
But that's a responsibility of those bond funds. And that's, I would say, on the development and awarding side, those funds were very easy to deal with. But there are, that obligation that the city had made it a little bit difficult for the city to go beyond that 20 million in that first round.
and what are some of the more recommended, since it's new in terms of the ATAX funds, what's some of the feedback that you've gotten so far in terms of what's
So-
working?
So far, so good. As a matter of fact, the Tammy Hoy Hawkins has helped either Beaufort or Hilton Head
I think it was Hilton Head.
with receiving their ATAX funds, and I think Charleston County also has their ATAX funds. Essentially, there is a requirement that the state has put out that you have to prepare a plan, a housing analysis and an impact plan, and then you submit that plan to them, and then you can access that funding. So we're working on our impact analysis right now. We have to get it before a committee of council and then council before we can submit it to the state. But essentially, once we do that,
And that was Tammy Hoy that helped with that?
Tammy Hoy Hawkins. As a matter of fact, we maybe plagiarized a little and used what she did up there to kind of model what we're doing here in Charleston. But essentially, yeah. So once you prepare that plan, submit it to the state, then you can receive ATAX funding. And I think it varies based on jurisdiction. I have not asked that question. I've just been told by our finance office that we could get up to 2 million.
Another question, Gianna. So you're, so many units and so much housing has been put out there, and I see the income level is a criterion.
Yes.
Is there any other filters of like public housing, hospitality? Like how did you determine, and does this even get involved after it's done in who it gets rented to? Does
So
that make sense?
the only requirement typically, and the requirements come based on the funding source. So with low-income housing tax credits, you can typically go up to the 80% threshold. But unless it's for seniors, there are no other requirements. So a family unit could mean a family of one or a family of three. And you have to be very careful about that because you don't want to violate fair housing laws. So if you say it's a family unit, that means it could be rented to anybody who fits that criteria. But usually that is the only, that's the only requirement, if you will, with most of those units. Under our workforce units, usually it's right at the 80% criteria that they're renting to, and those come usually in our private sector development. One group, I think, did maybe 60% in one of their units, and they went like hotcakes. They were rented before we could blink an eye.
But they worked in the city, so it was part of,
Right,
you had to, that was one of the criteria that you
exactly.
had to be employed.
And so honestly, really trying to get folks to focus more on, our hospitality workers, where we have 55 units coming, this is 24, hopefully by the end of next year, that'll be located on the low line, but it's essentially right off of King Street in downtown Charleston. So we anticipate that a lot of folks that will rent from that will be the folks that work on King Street in the restaurants and that sort of thing. As a matter of fact, they've already started calling about whether we're taking applications, and we aren't naturally, because the developer group will manage that process. But that just shows us how great the need is down there, especially for those who work. Yeah.
When does TIF funding, like, let's just say you had a strip of land, but beside it, there was city land that was undeveloped completely, but there were barriers to using that particular area. Would that be an opportunity for TIF funding?
It could be, yes.
So how do you find out for sure when TIF would be?
So TIF, it's a somewhat complicated process, but essentially your council has to approve use of TIF funds, because then what you have to do is go to your banks and determine what kind of rate you can get on borrowing TIF funds based on the amount of development that you anticipate happening in a particular area. And so normally I defer this to our CFO and assistant CFO, but essentially I know they have worked with Bank of America and other banks to look at rates, because the city is borrowing against the value that they anticipate will come in that TIF. And so we've done a TIF for $14 million, and I just know that because that was an area where the James Lewis Jr. building was. And so not only on housing, but on parks, on sidewalks, on other infrastructure needs in that area. So it covered probably a 4 to 5 mile area. But those TIF funds not only went towards the housing, but other improvements that needed to be made in that community. I'll have to get you a better explanation though.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be with you all. Y'all have a big job ahead of you.
Yes. Important.
Give me just a second and I'll come back and we'll talk about survey questions.
Do you want to take a break or do you want 7 minutes?
That's up to y'all.
So how-
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of follow-up questions for Jenna to follow up with you on.
Yes. Sorry,
Really
City council got this before you guys start meeting. Every one of them was sent a copy.
Well, thank you. And I think we're gonna have more than one public hearing on this issue too. Yeah.
Pretty high quality paper.
It is, John. Yeah. Serious.
He doesn't want it to
Hey,
fall
John,
between the seats.
earlier you said something about, okay, so you've got four
Rental units.
rental units. Let me find my notes, hold on.
You was seeing a postcard?
Ask about the HVAC system because that'll determine how old the property is, the square footage, the rental rate per month. But you're saying that you would not appreciate getting a survey that asks you how much you rent it out for per month?
Not if I have to put my name on it.
So you'd be okay with
But then
an
how-
online survey that was anonymous though?
I'm sorry.
You'd be okay with an anonymous
Absolutely.
online survey? When you said the postcard,
I don't think I'm gonna be the only one.
Now,
Oh, I
I
agree.
understand that,
It's a lot of
but look,
money. I don't think they wanna disclose it, but if it's anonymous, you might get a more accurate number. You can also,
but how would we
You can also
verify
give
the
it a different way.
accuracy if it's,
you can take how much they pay
Thank
for a
you.
business license per year and you can divide by 12, and that'll give you some more accurate, you can match that up too. So there's more than ways to get it than just by a survey.
yeah.
because
So
if they're
right-
all anonymous, then how would we know that there aren't motivated parties that are willing to fill out anonymously just for the sake of
No, you're
disproving a,
You're mailing it directly to them. and you're explaining why you want it, but the postcard.
Oh, the return will be
The
anonymous.
return
Right.
postcard
Okay, okay,
would be
thanks, that clears
anonymous
that up.
information.
Yeah, okay.
But are we planning to mail anything?
Not sure, I think that's what he's saying, is
Okay,
like,
I gotcha.
an online with anybody.
That's
could
the part
participate.
I get now.
You have
Okay.
all the addresses and everything already, so
Mhm.
putting together 100 letters, 105 letters shouldn't really be a big deal.
And
Yeah.
that is what we did, to get a guess of how much people are renting right now. We took
License fee.
from the, yeah, how much they report in income divided by 12. Now, that's not always accurate. They could have certain months they did not rent, and we don't know that, and so that's just a guess.
Okay.
No, that's helpful.
All right. So in the remaining packet that you have, there's a one-pager, I'm gonna go over that real quick. And then on the bottom, you have the survey, which is a compilation of what y'all sent me. And I put it together, edited a little bit, and I think this reflects what you want to ask. The one-pager, this is more details specifically, I think somebody asked this, who is receiving the public safety stipend right now. So this is $3,600 a month that's available to firemen and police officers who live on Folly or in the geographic boundaries of James Island. And there are 0 people right now in Folly, and there are 5 people who are doing it who live on James Island.
And there were 2 on
There were,
Coffee.
in the beginning of this year, there were 3 full-time workers using it.
Okay, so if you've got 600 a month for Folly, or 300 a month for anybody living in James Island. And last time we spoke, you said we had, or here it is right here, $365,000.
No, that's A-tax.
Excuse me. Then it was 3,600 a month.
It was $3,600 a month, and last time we spoke, it was pretty much full, and it being
Okay.
used. It is not at the moment, but I asked, and they said it normally is used.
So a public safety worker would have a salary of say like anything from what, 20, in the 20s or 30s on up
The
to
cops start about 50,
what, 100, 150?
to the highest would be the police chief, and
So you can't, like, when you have, it's not differentiating, I guess,
Doesn't matter
income
how-
level.
this is not based on income. Any employee of public safety can get it.
So if you have a $120,000 salary and then you have a $50,000 salary,
Each get the same.
they could each get that same number.
Correct.
So should
First
there
come,
be,
first served.
should there be an income level limit if we've only got X amount in the bank to give out?
Something for y'all to think about. I mean, that you can put that in your recommendations if you would like. But right now, there is no income limit.
What is 120,000, what does that put, if you're at a max of 120 to 150,000, what is that in terms of the 30%? What's the average?
I can figure that out. I can figure out what these numbers mean and.
Like public safety, wasn't it $68,000?
That's, yeah, that's.
So 30% of 68,000 is 1,700 a month.
Mhm.
Is
So-
what they.
That would be
What they
30%, yeah.
Right, that was what they should be
Right.
spending. And the whole point of that, no matter what their income is getting public safety close on the island. So to me,
Right,
it doesn't
and-
matter if
and
you make
they're
50, make
expecting-
100, we want,
They're expected to answer calls off duty.
yeah, exactly.
Do you think this number is low as to why it's 0 right now? Or is it just,
I mean,
we've had some people leave and it's just nobody?
we've had some people leave, which is why it's happening, but I think, yes, I do think it's low. I mean, 600 doesn't make a huge difference. on
When-
Folly
and when the-
compared to Folly.
and when
So
the
it
rent
may
was
not
fifty-
make up that gap.
600 only brings you to 2,300 if you're making 68,000, so the average rental's 3,500.
Right.
That's what I was gonna
Find
say,
one.
it used to be rentals were 1,200, 1,800, or even less
How
than
many-
that
how
for
many
sure.
individual
So,
properties are, taxable properties are there on Folly?
About
Is it 2,300?
2,400.
2,400.
2,400.
But we're potentially gonna have 10 times the amount of funds available than we currently have
Why is that?
for, what, the ATEX money?
Okay, so the last line that I,
Doesn't have to do with
that's
this.
separate.
Okay.
This is how much the city is allowed to spend from ATAX money on workforce housing development.
Okay,
So
but
this was
not
that,
on the stipend.
I don't, this was the new law that just allows
Okay.
this. We're not sure what it can be used for, if it can be used for a stipend or not. I would have to figure that out.
But we can't just arbitrarily say public safety workers on the island should get $1,500 a month. Like, that money,
You can suggest that to council, and then council can.
they have to
We still have
figure
to
out
find
where it
funding
comes
for it.
from. Okay.
The funding.
And for funding, council's gonna worry about
We
that.
don't
Lee's
have
gonna figure that out.
we've specifically been told on the workforce housing or affordable housing, we don't have to work on the funding side of it. We just
Okay.
have to
Right.
present the options.
On
I'm
the
not-
$3,600 a month that we have right now available for these folks, that's like $43,000. So that is a number that council can add to or take from
That's
the
in
budget,
council's
so we can.
discretion.
So it
to
might
fund
still be
that.
the same number of people at the end, but make it more attractive by increasing
Mhm.
that 600 or 300 to make it more, affordable, I guess, right?
Do you know off the top of your head if there's any stipulation that they have to have been employed X amount of years before they can apply?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's definitely, if it is, it's a month
Oh,
or
okay.
two. It's-
Could it be
If they don't-
worded as a percentage of their
Pardon?
income? Like instead of a $600 flat dollar fee for someone that makes X amount? Could it be a percentage of that 600 based upon their income?
Sure, anything's on the table that you don't want.
That would be something you would include in the survey, like if we sent it to employees, City of Valley Beach employees, is this something is that how you would like it structured? If it's a percentage of the employee, of our salaries, or is it a flat thing, right? Like,
Because if somebody was making 150 and I was only making 50,
Make it sound like people that work for the city make a lot of money.
no, I'm just saying that every little bit helps.
Yeah,
And
I
if you're
agree.
working
Yeah.
with everybody and one person's making 150 and the other person's making 50, and you get the same exact stipend, that seems a little unfair.
So those are things for y'all to think about, and when it comes time to do the recommendations, flesh it out and figure out what, if you want to include an income limit and what that might be, or how you would like to structure it.
Okay.
So
And this stipend is not available to any other city staff, it's
Correct.
just public safety currently.
just fire and, full-time fire and police. The second question here is how many city employees there are. Someone asked that just so everybody has that information, what department they work in. And then the third one, so the law that was passed this year or last year that allows the city to use ATAX money, allows the city to use 35% of the ATAX money. And so I think I gave you a back of the envelope number last month. So this is just, this comes from Lee. He did a projection based on our last 5 years, I think, of ATAX income. How much would 35% of that be that could be available to use on workforce housing development?
It sounds like it's just for like building new.
Yeah, like I've seen, I know Greenville, either the city or the county, bought some land recently, so yeah, acquisition seems to be what I've seen.
I would like more details on that, because if we don't have to build more.
What it sounded like from Gianna that it was also, because she was saying that you had to have like a plan for how the development would be
Yeah,
used
would
in,
look.
yeah.
That would be a follow-up to know for sure.
All right, do y'all want me to put this up on the screen? Or you have it in front of you, but it says the affordable
How many
housing.
questions are there? Are we gonna go through every single one as a whole group, or?
There's a lot of repetition.
Shoot.
The first four are basically the same thing.
Okay, so I was wondering, do we wanna have time with this to digest? But if we
That's
can
their
do-
call.
Huh?
She asked if we're gonna have time.
I didn't know if we were talking about another hour or two, or.
We don't really have a time limit, but
No, this won't take another hour or two. And the first question, the first four are the same. It just goes to different people, whether you own or whether you rent or don't rent it.
Well, I need to ask one more question about this. Why is it that only 5 employees are opting in for this amount if you,
The others don't live close enough to qualify. they live in Waterloo.
Right.
Only
You are
5 live in
Charleston.
James Island.
Or the stipend wasn't enough to make it affordable for them to move
Yeah.
here. Or they already own their house somewhere else, they don't wanna live here.
That's what it is.
Right.
What?
It's not enough money to cover anything out
No.
there. It's not covering your utilities.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm gonna go through, I'm not gonna read every word of this, we're not, it's Kristen, I promise, it's not gonna take another hour, and y'all can always cut me off at any time if you want to.
And we gotta get this thing out.
Yeah. So the first page here, and this will go at the beginning of each survey, so that, to educate the people who are answering these questions a little bit about why we're asking these questions, what is the city trying to accomplish, and give them some definitions about affordable housing and workforce housing. Y'all take a look at that and see if there's anything you want. I did not add a lot to this, so if you want to add something later if you think of it, make a little note and let me know. So survey option number 1 is for full-time owners. These are
residents. These are full-time owners.
full-time residents.
Residents.
Owners who are full-time. So I'm gonna ask them, because these are words that, are not very clear. So do you live full-time on Folly? You may rent out your home under 72 days as an owner-occupied short-term rental, or you may not rent out your home at all. So that's the target audience for this first question. How long have you lived on Folly? How many bedrooms and bathrooms? Do you rent it out for that 72-day period? Do you think City of Folly Beach should prioritize affordable housing in these different ways here? And these three, these are gonna be repetitive. You could vote for more than one for these three.
Can I ask you a quick question on
Yeah.
just number 4? At this point in time, the city has prioritized this because it's with us. Do we need to ask owners what they think about it? Or do you think that the city should prioritize?
This
or-
is
I'm
there
trying to
an
think of how to
appetite?
keep it as concise as possible for someone to actually do it.
Respond.
You know what I mean?
This has been floated, that is there an appetite in the public to fund things like this?
Gotcha,
And
okay.
so, yeah, I do think that's a necessary question. So, do you think the city should do these things? Number 5 is, which ones would you support funding? And so, the first one is ADUs, allowing ADUs if your property can otherwise handle it. City purchasing land in Folly Beach, the city purchasing land outside of Folly Beach. Stipends, we've talked a little bit about already, but that could be stipends for general public or city employees. Incentives to homeowners, and these are general, these aren't obviously, these aren't fleshed out policies, but just in general, is this something that somebody would support? And then annexing land to have more room for development. Number 6, I asked if they,
Can I ask you a question?
yeah,
I see purchasing land, but would we want to add purchasing existing properties?
yeah. When you say purchasing land or existing properties
Yeah,
for that?
exactly.
I mean, or existing develop, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Or buildings, I guess. I don't know how you want to write it, but just a house that already exists or building that exists.
Yep, got it. Anybody else? All right, number 6, if you were to be able to put an ADU on your property, would you do it? And I'll do an open comment box so they can give us some feedback on why they would or wouldn't. Number 7 is who they think these affordable housing initiatives should target.
Hold on, Jenna, just when it comes to aggregating data at the end of the day, on number 6, would you want to offer like A, B, C, or check the box of the things, reasons why you would not support it? So that you can see, say, environmental density, or, so that you can get, and then leave one for other and they can fill it in, so you
Yeah.
get so few, you don't have quite so many things to look at and read.
Yeah,
And
that's good. So anything else? Environmental density?
Just because
Park.
my property's not big enough. It's not an
Yeah,
option.
size.
Yeah.
Well, she said parking was one of the biggest issues
Uh-huh.
downtown.
Yeah.
I would put things like environmental size, property size, parking, noise, privacy.
Yeah, no, I'll I'll flesh that out.
Or just the commitment, what was it, 10 years, 20
Well,
years?
that's not a.
That's not on there yet.
No.
We're starting off with, would you consider it?
Just would you consider it, and why and why not? All right, number 7, target audience. This breaks down, we've already talked about these, residents of Folly Beach, first responders, other city employees, not first responders, or other employees who work in Folly Beach but are not city employees. And then if you choose a location to say, for instance, that there were a stipend available, where do those people have to live? Anywhere 20 miles, James Island, Folly Beach, or in the city of Folly Beach.
Are people gonna be able to choose more than one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would add small business owners, because there are people who don't work for another business, but own a small business here that rent.
For number 8,
Number 7,
okay.
who should be the target? Current residents, first responders. I would also put city staff, employees of businesses, small business owners. I could name.
So would that be somebody who owns property, owns a business but does not live here, is what you're saying?
There's quite a few of them right now.
Okay. Number 2 is targeting or asking people who own a second home that they do not rent out at all. Same questions, how long have you been here, bedrooms, bathrooms, do you think it's a priority, and which ones would you support? And I'll make all the changes to these that we talked about for the first one. Same thing, would you consider an ADU? Number 6 is new. Would you be willing to offer your second home as affordable housing or workforce housing for a certain number of years in exchange for financial or zoning benefits?
Explain the zoning benefits. Like we would, even if you're in West, 5th Block West, actually, you would, could be in commercial.
No, not
What
commercial,
would-
it would be density, just different ways
Just
for density. So Charleston, I don't think she talked about this, has one specific district that they give you points for certain affordable housing, certain steps you take towards helping affordable housing, and at a certain number of points, you get to increase the number of floors of your building. So that's for.
Here we are,
I would get you like, no.
That's for a multi-unit, so instead of 6 floors, you're allowed 7 floors. If you get 24 points of adding green space and adding the longer number of years, 10 years versus 5 years, or things like
This
that.
is word zoning that was throwing me off here on this part of it. I don't really understand getting a zoning benefit.
Yeah,
allowing
the
an
ADU.
would be a zoning benefit.
Okay. I think that that would be hard for somebody just in the regular general public to,
Okay,
you might have to explain the question, I guess.
sure. What number was that?
6.
Okay, and then 7, would you be willing to offer your home if you received an investor short-term rental license at the end? And this would be important under the cap, right? So the people who can't get one right now because of the cap would be allowed if they were offering affordable housing for a certain number of time, certain period of time.
I guess that's good data to just find out the tolerance for it, but at the same time, it doesn't help for long-term affordable housing. If you're like, great, yeah, in 10 years you can get an ISTR, well, it's not gonna be that long, you know what I mean? So
Sure.
for 1 year time, that just doesn't create, in my opinion, doesn't support an affordable housing initiative where
I
you're
mean, this is
creating permanent.
immediate, this is not, yeah, that's not looking long term.
I also think somewhere in here, we need to, I don't know where you want to put it, but I feel like we need to talk about a 12-month lease. And right now, the long-term housing is truly defined right now as 30 days plus.
Yes.
So I feel like we need to put in there somewhere about, a true annual lease.
Yeah.
Do
Are
y'all
you saying
agree?
requiring an annual lease?
Well, no, just their tolerance for it. Like right now, if you're currently renting 30 days or more, because there's probably quite a lot that are renting 30, not quite, but there's a handful probably that are renting 30 days or more. How can we encourage those folks or anybody to rent for an actual,
Well,
12
question number 8. is,
Oh, is it in here?
but it says 30 days or more, and you could change that to something like 6 months plus or something, or 12 months plus.
Just because it allows 30 days or more doesn't mean people are doing 30 days. I mean, most leases are for 12 months from the ones that I mean, I looked at every single one, 100 and whatever. There's maybe 3 advertisements out there for 30-day rentals.
I don't know about that. I think.
For advertisements, yeah.
Okay, for advertising.
I mean, online, that's what's showing right now in Folly.
That's just truly probably a whole nother topic to discuss, but as a part of this whole forum and project, I think we need to be very clear that there's midterm, whatever you wanna call the 30 days, that is not long-term housing for a workforce, you know, and that's just a different, I think we need to start defining.
So
Defining it.
if someone is giving one of these incentives, they have to offer a 12-month lease, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. Personally, I
Well,
just don't
at
think it
least
solves the
6
problem.
months, because if you look at, like, and I don't mean to scale back on long-term housing, because 6 months is not ideal for a worker to be able to commit to their job, but 6 months is also attractive to a homeowner who wants to come in for 3 or 4 months. They're gonna have to furnish the house at 6 months. They wouldn't be having this long-term renter come in and furnish their house for just 6 months for them to come in and have another long-term renter come through. They would probably have their house furnished and have a long-term renter come in and live in a furnished house so that they could theoretically come in for 3 months out of the year to enjoy their vacation home. If we're talking about people that own a house that don't typically live in that house. So there's a compromise there that we need to look at from a perspective of a long-term renter, but also of someone who is on the fence about wanting to rent out their home.
And I think maybe it ends up being a sliding scale down the road, but I guess I feel strongly that long-term housing is not 6 months. Because then you aren't gonna move your furniture every 6 months somewhere else, you know? But I understand what you're saying, I think it's people that
But you gotta
wanna
make it
spend.
attractive for both sides, or if somebody
Sure.
can afford not to rent their home out now so that they can enjoy 3 months of it, they sure as hell aren't gonna rent it out and for
No, I
a full
agree with
year.
And that's what I asked number 8, if they're not doing it, is there anything
So
else
you'd
that
have
would
to
incentivize them
find
to?
to what would incentivize it.
And so maybe it's like how we're structured in the
8
at
months,
the end of all
9
this.
months.
For the purposes of the survey, you could just take out the 30 days or more. I think
Yeah.
most people would
Yeah,
not see
30 days
that
or
term.
more.
I just put that because that's the definition of long-term.
Yeah,
which
you're
is-
right.
Yeah, that's great, okay.
Down the road, I think you can structure the incentive or the discounts or whatever.
Because I think it's
for
gonna
how
be very
long.
specific for that house and that family that wants to consider long-term rent. If they still wanna come to their house for 3 months out of the year, 2 months out of the year, you're gonna have to take it case by case. So to take 30 days out or more to keep it in is very limiting.
Well, that's the minimum.
What's gonna be the administrative cost of this? I mean, this is massive.
Administrative cost of,
Managing all this.
The survey?
Once the, you know, when you talk about 30 days, you talk about long-term, you talk about ADUs, I mean, somebody's gonna have to manage it all. It's,
sure, I mean, and that's, the topic is complicated, and whatever the recommendations go to council may end up with a very complicated system. So I would ask you to keep that in mind so that when we are enforcing it, that it is easy for everyone to understand and consistent. But yeah, I mean, if we do a program like this, there will be adding administrative costs
Yeah.
to the city.
the simplistic way of manage this entire thing would be to give everybody raises. Serious.
Okay, that can be
And when
a
you think about
recommendation.
it, if you were to give everybody $10,000,
But that's just for city workers.
$790,000 a year divided by 24 comes up to $27 a month. Would I be willing to pay $27 a month to resolve this issue? I would.
Are we property owner, you mean?
Hmm?
The property owners have to pay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it would be.
Problem is you have to also incentivize more housing stock available to be
Mhm.
long-term, and that's a totally different
And these
budget.
can all
I know,
be your recommendations.
Yeah.
Survey number 3 is investment owners, people who don't live in the house and they rent it out short term. how long have you owned your home, how many bedrooms, baths? Same question, what should you prioritize? How should we prioritize it? Number 5, if the city were to offer you a financial incentive to participate in renting your home to long-term renters, would you consider?
I'm sorry, I'm kind of a data head though. If you don't define, everybody's gonna interpret long-term differently. Currently, 30 days is long-term. So I guess maybe we might wanna break it down into 30 days or more, 6 months or more, 12-month lease, and give them those options.
Well, if you're a
Would you-
short-term rental license holder, are you going to rent your home for 6 months and lose your short-term rental license?
Right, they're not-
So, I mean, I think it would imply that if you're gonna do that, you would be,
Giving it up for,
you'd be doing that for the long run.
yes.
I'll work on that.
I just wanna make sure that we're getting clear,
I
like,
think you're right.
I think we're getting data that is actually, once you scrub it, it's credible.
Right,
Like, everybody's interpretation of a definition is
Mhm.
gonna screw up all the data.
right,
Yeah.
okay, I got it. Would you be willing to offer your investment home as affordable housing for a certain number of years in exchange for financial or zoning benefits? And then are there other incentives that would convince you to change from short-term to long-term?
Do we, so
8, 9, 10, 11 are all the same.
in all of these, does it ask them why they currently wouldn't do it? Like, I've seen why would you do it for financial benefits? But it might be interesting just to say, why don't you consider it now? Because if you already have an investment short-term rental, that's most likely gonna be the answer, but I think you're gonna hear a whole lot of, I wanna come use my house in the summertime. You know, so just knowing why people don't now, the behaviors and reasons might be helpful. Group, what do y'all think? I know I'm talking a lot.
That's a good idea, yeah. There are some obvious reasons, but
I'd like to,
the more data we have, the more it's gonna help us for sure.
I think a lot of this we're just not gonna be able to get because it's their business. I mean, meaning they don't have to tell us if they, overpaid in construction and have a lot of reasons why they need to STR versus LTR right now in the short term. The long term is that maybe it would be an option for long-term rent if they can short-term rent for the next 5 to 10 years, but that doesn't help our situation now. So there's gonna be a lot of reasons why ISTRs in particular are not gonna be interested in this.
It'll be different for everybody. Yeah, so we'll offer some of the general reasons, and then I'll also do a box to just tell us why.
Yeah.
Or why not. All right, 8, 9, 10, 11 are the same. Number 4, investment owners for long-term rentals. So these are people who own a home that they do not live in and they rent out. I'll take out the 30 days. And this will be where I'll work on that definition of long-term.
Should we be asking about an HVAC system right now?
To me,
Well,
it
So
doesn't.
are you
it
gonna,
doesn't
are you
make
gonna
any
define
sense.
long-term then?
You can get
Are
a
we
new
getting rid of
HVAC
the
system.
30
We had to
days?
get a new HVAC system.
Yeah, I mean,
All the
any
way through.
house could have a window unit.
Our house is not very old, but we still had to get a brand new HVAC system.
I know, so I guess I'm not totally sure that the HVAC specifically is part of it, but I think the goal is how old is the house? Or are you trying to find out like what condition the house is in and how old it is? Like,
Well,
to
we
be honest, I
just-
think we
No,
might
more or
have,
less, like, is it financially feasible? Typically, the older houses at this point should have a very limited amount of years left of paying off a house, which makes it more feasible to be able to rent it out long term, am I right? I mean, if you have a brand new house, brand new construction, you got a lot of
You
bills
just
to
don't
pay.
know when they bought it.
Yeah.
What if they just bought it and it's fully financed? and-
Yeah, it could be an
Yeah,
old
they
house.
might
It
take
could
cash
be
for it.
1 year in. You can just ask how old the house is.
yeah.
How would that
Or
contribute to any of this?
Because anybody could have bought a house
The
built in
age of the house.
1930, they just bought it yesterday, so like how old the house is doesn't help us with how much costs and overhead there is to it.
Right.
But that's not the question. The question is, how many years have you owned your home? So taking that into
You're always
consideration.
asking a second question of how old the house was.
Oh, no.
Is there any interest in that?
No, I think it really comes down to, are you in a financially stable place to be able to rent out your home? And based upon the years of ownership, sometimes that's a telling sign of whether or not somebody is equipped.
Do you think that's a fair question?
And that's my question. That's my question.
I
Is
don't know if it
that
provides
okay?
us
You're
data.
not asking them how much they paid for their house, on what date they bought it, and how much your mortgage is. You're just saying, how long have you owned your home? I mean, if I have if I've had a place for 15 years, I'm either done paying for it or I'm halfway there.
And you know what, I know we're talking about this on number 4, like, if the same applies to all the rest of the
Yeah.
questions. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if it matters. We're probably gonna see the long-term rental owners have owned it the longest, I would assume, because they can more so afford to rent it long-term, if that makes sense.
But are we trying to get a picture of the individual owner's financial situation?
I know, I don't know if
Because I don't think, personally, I don't think that should factor into this.
I agree.
But you still have to find out what would motivate, you have, in order
What would
to
be
do
the
that, you have to
motivating
find that
factor?
motivating factor, and,
Okay.
you know, if.
Well, that's what is, these questions about what would incentivize you.
Number 6,
Right.
which, if you look
Oh,
at
on the
it,
previous
is probably
one?
the most important question, period.
On question number 4? Sorry, on survey option number 4?
Survey option number 3 or
5 has,
5. 5 is number 6.
Well, I don't see how 6 really applies if we're asking the question if they own a second home that they don't live in, because then they might not necessarily live on Folly.
it says
They could still offer.
when you
it
don't live
as a
in, that you
long-term
rent
rental.
out for 30 days or longer.
I'm lost on what page we're on now. We're on survey 4 still?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, we are on 4, okay.
I thought we jumped to, so question number 5, is that what you're talking about? On survey 4 for investment owners of long-term rentals.
I think Kevin was talking about survey number 3.
I think so too. You were talking about question number 6 on survey 3.
Yeah.
Was that the one you were talking
Right here.
about?
Yeah, as the
Okay, that's for
motivating
survey
factor.
3, but
Yeah.
we're on survey 4.
Well, we can talk about that if we want to.
Well, I think he was going back to say that that question suffices on would you be willing to offer your home if there's an incentive? That's why he jumped over there, I think. Right?
Are you saying that that question should be on this survey as well? Because it's not.
Well, survey 4, they're already offering the long-term rentals.
Right.
So that we don't even to switch. We don't,
I think we're still back to, does the question number 1 on almost all of these matter?
I think it matters. I think it matters.
Doesn't hurt, but I don't think it tells us anything.
I don't think it tells
I
us
don't think it-
anything.
I don't think,
If you've only owned your home for a year versus 15 years, you can gain a much better understanding of where someone might be economically
But you're still
without
kinda guessing.
asking them very personal details.
But you're still just guessing, because you don't know.
right.
Because
don't know.
you also, like you said, you could be 15 years into your mortgage, you could have no mortgage, you could have just refinanced, taken all of that out and still have a full mortgage.
And if you just bought it in the last year and you paid cash for it, you probably paid over $1 million for it, but you also aren't short-term renting it, so you might be motivated to long-term rent it. Yeah.
You also might be unmotivated to answer these questions if you answer number 1, because then you feel
Yeah.
like it,
You can narrow it down to who it is.
you know, I mean, well, not that, but just, you know, maybe that feels personal to people too. But they're like, you don't need to know that, but I can answer all of these based on my personal situation, or, you know, based on somebody's
But then
personal
wouldn't it come
situation.
down to whether or not we make it anonymous or not anonymous?
Oh, it's going to be
It's gonna be
anonymous.
anonymous for
yeah.
sure.
So then,
But I think
What
people
would it-
still may not trust that, you know. Maybe if you had gathered this, because this is just trying to build a foundation of see what the threshold of people, what it is, what are they willing to answer. And, you know, you get these back, hopefully it's busy and you get really good answers, but maybe, you know, and with that, maybe you need to do another survey after that. You're like, okay, now we got some really good information. Now let's get a little more detailed. you know, if you can, if, you know, all these
So
come
how
back.
much do you charge per month to rent out your property?
That's probably gonna-
Yeah, I
Probably
mean,
gonna
you
rub
know.
them the wrong way.
Get real personal.
Should
But-
that be a bracket though? I charge
But I think
Yes.
it's so important to know
1,500 or
what
below, 1,500
is
to
being
3,000.
charged.
Or maybe you give them a range.
That's what I think too. I
Yeah,
think-
yeah.
'cause Listen, I
On
want to respect
four.
the anonymity,
But I-
that's the word, the
I just
desire to be
wonder
anonymous.
if we're getting really bogged down and really what we need is just to, you know, try to get some sort of picture of what the appetite is.
We
for
really
this and
need
how far are people willing
Question
to
5.
go.
On
But
all the
technically,
other
we don't
ones,
even
what is
need
the
to know how
public
much
willing
they
to
charge,
support?
because if they're
I mean,
long-term renting, we already know what they're being
I
charged,
think
right?
question
No.
5
No.
is solid.
No.
Then I think
I
we
like
really
it.
do need to know
But-
what
All
they're
right,
being
well,
charged.
Hold on, we got too many conversations going, I
Right.
can't follow.
Okay, I think everybody agrees are gonna ask how much they charge. The question is for number one, and this goes back for all of the surveys. I want a consensus from y'all about whether to ask how long they've owned the house.
Here's my
I
thoughts,
think it's
and I will say, question 5, that is basically saying, would you support the city of Folly Beach?
Wait, on which
Not
survey?
on survey 1
Number
through 3.
3.
Okay, back to,
In all of this surveying, we're trying to gather an understanding of what the residents and property owners are willing to accept as an acceptable program for affordable housing. So maybe they all hate ADUs, maybe they want to do this, but whatever it may be, that's the most important question we need answered, because if the public won't support it, it doesn't even make sense to send it to council.
right.
But if we have how many years you've lived here, and we find out that most of the support is coming from people who have lived here under a year or 1 to 4 years, then we may not have reached the entire audience we wanted to reach to gather the information, and we may need to seek a different approach to get the
Fair enough.
information.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only reason I would leave it there is,
And you can also tell their level of commitment to Folly. If they've been here for 5 to 15 something years, then they might be more motivated for the community itself versus their property, their actual property. I think we should leave it in.
I think what Paula said is like, because then you can kind of gauge the, you know, the worthiness of your responses. You know, like, are you getting these 10 to 14 year people?
The
here?
diversity of the participants.
Yeah, the diversity, yeah, I think you're that, and I don't know how, if you could say it differently, so people don't feel so, well, that's a personal question.
Right.
You know, like, in order to make I don't know if, you know, if, in order to make
And
sure.
how
Is
about-
that
how many
question even
years?
relevant though? And what are you gonna
That's
do with
kind
that
of, that's
information?
where
Well,
we started.
that's
I mean, I don't see
the
any relevance at all
I
in that
didn't either
question.
until Paula said that.
Can we ask
and
from
then-
our
I
audience
don't
on
care
what
whether
our
you're here
audience
for
thinks
5
about
years or
it?
20.
Yeah, but we want to make sure we're reaching everybody, like all
Yeah.
different.
I think it doesn't hurt as long as it's not,
Reaching
as long as it's
everybody,
not too
I don't understand
personal.
what that means.
Well, to make sure that we're, you know, our responses are from a wide
We're
variety
representing
of
a lot of
residents. You know, it's not just the ones that have just been here for a year. It's, you know, it's the ones that have been
Here's
here
the
for 10,
question, I mean, it's just, you go back to number 5 and 6. Would you be willing to offer your?
That's what we really want to know.
I mean,
It is.
you're gonna rent or not? I mean, and what would, and is it ADU that brings you home? I mean, what?
I would
Is
be
it handing
okay
you
with
cash
leaving one
incentive?
off. That's my reason why.
Because when
I
you look
mean,
at the
you
survey,
got a
you
lot
gotta
of
look at the
verbiage here, but-
analytics of the survey itself. You have
Who's
to look
answering the
at
survey?
who is this survey, who is.
Without identifying the actual person, because we don't care who the person is, we just want
Jenna,
demographics
is this-
about.
This is all electronic, right? It's not being mailed
This will all
to
be
these
on
people?
Survey Monkey.
Okay.
Do they have to answer, could they skip that question and still complete the survey?
Will you do that? Absolutely we can.
You could put not required or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, maybe do that, and then it's, and
Up to
then
them if they want to.
we would have, you know, if everybody answers it, great. If nobody, we're like, well, we didn't need to do that, you know, or something.
On that note, so we are making it available because we're asking property owners who don't live here. So it's gonna be digital, available to anybody that's, has a relationship to Folly, or property on Folly, basically. Good, and then I think there's the idea about mailing to somebody is probably a good one, at least for people that are here locally. I don't know how you, because we certainly can't send it out to
Well,
thousands of 2,400.
We know how many long-term renters our out there, and we know who they are and where they live.
But they
So
are
This is something you could do a mail for them.
For the long-term rental part, yeah, for whomever is long-term renting currently, yes. What I'm saying is that we've got, that 1,100 other properties or whatever it is, 1,200 properties out there that are either, that don't live here. So we want to get, those are the people who might have a stock of houses that we can incentivize, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that we're getting,
Well, I'll talk to Stacy about the email addresses that she has for investors.
Yeah.
So that we can make sure that we're reaching all the people that we want to reach.
just any property.
So
owner.
if somebody owned 7 properties versus 2 properties versus 1, would they fill out the electronic, how would you
Oh.
monitor them filling it out
That's true.
And then I
4
thought-
separate times?
I thought about that and I haven't come up with an answer.
7 times, if it's not an actual piece of paper.
SurveyMonkey is so, you're able to manipulate it so much that I bet I could figure out a way to say do you long-term rent, how many properties, and if it's more than one, then, I'll get
There's not that many.
It would only be how much you charge is the only thing.
If you
So,
have
yeah.
to put
Or-
your
or
email
how long
address
you
in, I think you can set it so the same email address can't answer more than one
If
time.
there's 2 owners of the
Okay.
property, then how would you get accurate answers if you're emailing it to them and they
We're
got
not
2
looking for
separate email
statistical
addresses?
data we're looking for is the appetite out there.
Right.
So we might get 2 owners.
But if
who-
I'm
do
on the
think it's
deed and
perfect.
somebody else is on the deed and you send it to 2 different email addresses, technically your questions should just be one email.
Yeah, one set of questions where you could say how many properties, 1, 2, or 3 or
But
more.
you
or
would get a
something.
duplicate answer if you sent it to both me and my spouse who own the properties.
Oh, my spouse. I thought you meant like an LLC that had 2 different.
But all that, how would you regulate electronically?
Well, don't
I
you
don't-
want as many
Yeah.
inputs? I don't think it
Yeah, I don't
matters.
think- I don't
Like,
think
you
it
might have one
matters.
opinion and
You
Chris
still
has a
wanna
different
know-
one.
your-
But you
your
might
spouse
get-
might have different opinions on what you might support, and so we would like to have your answers for both.
And I can't imagine that someone who's currently got a long-term rental that has to answer or is planning to answer the question about how much do you charge, they probably are gonna give you the same answer because they know how much they charge. I don't think it matters to have more than one opinion from the same household on most of it, except for how much do you charge.
Well, in reverse, if it's the tenants answering,
We should still
How
hear
valid
from.
is this information gonna be if we only get a 50% response?
You
We're not
might get
gonna
it,
get,
we might
like,
get
Huh?
10%.
This isn't gonna be a statistical analysis of this, y'all. This is
It's
just to
gonna
give
be
you an
appetite.
appetite of what we think of the people who hit send.
yeah, I know it's probably just one of these things that we need to do. But
This is just
sometimes
like
surveys
talk-
can
enough
backfire,
people went and
that's
talked
all.
to their friends and got some answers. That's how this is gonna benefit you.
I keep thinking about the police officers saying about speeding, and if we survey and and we're surveying to kind of move into a direction of getting, lower speed limit for, not to say that we don't wanna have a great speed limit here, but if we don't get the answers, it might backfire, and I just don't want a survey like this where we're trying to seek out
You just wanna make
real
sure they're correct.
numbers backfire, and then, if we don't get a good response rate, we deem that as it's not needed.
If you don't get a good response rate, you don't have to put, any credence, give it any credence.
I think what
That's-
she's saying is that if you don't get a lot of participation, that doesn't mean that this initiative is dead, right? You're more concerned
I'm
like if there's
concerned that
not.
if we don't get, real numbers, like if electronically there's no way to keep the numbers accurate, super accurate, then it could backfire, and in that a survey, if you don't get enough participants, it might make it seem as though we don't
An
need
inaccurate-
affordable housing.
Right, an
or
inaccurate
it-
insight might gleam
It
out
might
of it if it's.
backfire is all. I get worried with surveys in general, if it's
So
necessary.
what is your suggestion?
Right.
How
If
would
it's
you-
just a run-of-the-mill thing that the city needs to do to say that we did it so that we can move on to the next step, that's one thing.
We need it.
Yeah, we need
Well,
it.
we need it.
We asked for
But
it.
at the same time, I'm hesitant, just like you say, if they hit number 1 and they're like, ugh, I don't like this survey, turn off the computer. And
Well,
you
I'd
don't
rather
get
not, I'd
that.
rather get no data than get totally skewed wrong data. You know what I mean? Like, I have to say that's why I'm considerate of how much people are willing to answer and how personal it is. I just want to be respectful because I think people who click on it and decide they're going to participate are either going to answer as accurately, as honestly as they can, or they're going to turn it off, and that's fine. Like,
I don't think anybody's gonna click the link if they are not interested in
Right.
completing the survey.
How
in the
about
first
I
place.
move the question about how long you've lived here to the end? And not required, so the
She'll take what?
it's probably not.
So that the first
No,
question
it's
is
not
how
the
much
first
do you
question.
charge per month? Maybe we should look at.
No,
all
I
of
think
them.
we can reshuffle it, but like, do you think we should prioritize affordable housing? To me, feels like a good start, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
probably wouldn't continue if you disagree. You probably didn't click on the link in the first place, or maybe you want to tell us you don't think it's important. But I also, just back to how this part of the conversation started, I don't want somebody who owns 3 or 4 long-term rentals, which some people do, to have to do the whole thing
No,
multiple
don't.
times. I think we need to add
Yeah.
a, do you own one
Survey month is
property?
very customizable in that
Perfect.
way, they will not have to do more than one survey.
Perfect, because most of the questions you can answer once.
Right.
But-
Right.
So how much per rent and?
And maybe you say in the beginning of the survey, like this little cover sheet, hey, we realize, we're trying to just, get some sort of picture of what, those who live here, work here, own a business here are willing to do and interested in doing. So that people aren't like, oh my God, this is how it's gonna be, kind of
Right.
thing. So maybe they can keep that in their head while they're answering these questions, you would get more of a, you want people to maybe dream a little bit and be like, oh yeah, I might do that.
I
That would
totally
be
agree.
interesting, because that's good info. You're like, okay, there's a little bit of an appetite for that. It's not, well, I'm not doing this tomorrow. You don't want people to think that's what's gonna happen tomorrow. Like, you want them to kind
I
of,
agree.
project out and think of, what is possible, for that. So if somehow the writing or, the description could
I
somehow
like
lean
more
that
about,
way
yeah,
a
why,
little
what are
bit.
y'all doing?
So that they're not like, oh my God, if I say yes, this is what I'm gonna have to do,
Right.
or something too.
Yeah, I think it's so important. So we'd like to hear from the voices and the ideas, or not the ideas, but we'd like to hear input from our business owners, our property owners, our
Yeah.
residents, et cetera. And your voice is important to us as we consider this initiative,
Right.
I don't
Right.
know if we even need to be asking how much they charge to rent out their property if we're not considering the square footage of the house and how many bedrooms and bathrooms are in here, and I don't
We're
see
doing-
bedrooms or bathrooms in
I have a
in
note on
these.
that too, that we should say like per unit, do you rent
Oh,
out?
I skipped bedroom or bathroom on number 4 then. Number 1, 2, and 3 do have, we are asking bedrooms and bathrooms, but I'll add it for number 4 for the.
For survey
month
for?
To give you.
For 4 and,
Yeah, I
there's
think
another
it's,
one in there.
do you rent per unit, per bedroom, right, full house, or how much do you?
What would
Because
be
the
the
square
cost?
footage doesn't matter, it's the number of bedrooms. that
Right,
matters.
it's the number of people who are in there.
Yeah, number of people that are.
Yeah. All right, number 5, business owners. I think this is gonna be a tough one.
It's gonna be hard to fill out with the questions,
Yeah, I
like how
don't-
far do they have to go, how many of them are cost burden?
I don't know that this is gonna get filled out at all for business owners, but, so,
I do think that the average commute for employees is a huge motivating factor on both sides. I think that one should at least stay.
That means they have to survey
Right,
every
my-
single employee, that's the
my
reason
point
I
is
think
no-
they won't do it, is
yeah,
just because
number
they don't
6 is
wanna.
asking the employees themselves, so we can get the
Yeah.
actual data instead of having the manager figure it out for every employee.
Oh, yeah, excuse me, this is business owners.
Business owners.
Where's the other
What
one?
if you ask, what about, well, like business owners thinking,
Oh.
okay, if you own a business out here, what are you willing to do for your employees? Like,
I think
Okay,
it
so
is
that
kind of nice to know though, the average commute, so I think, again, make it easy though, is it 1 to 5 miles, is it, 5 to 10 or more? Just in general, because there are gonna be, some people live on the island, even the average, I don't know if it's gonna help us too much, but some people live on the island that work there, and 90% of them live off the island.
But asking if their housing cost burdened is,
Yeah.
asking them, how much do you pay for rent right now, and let me get out a calculator and.
Well, we don't have
We're
to
not gonna
ask
know
them.
this
Number
stuff.
5, so we're telling
Where
you
do
why
we
we're asking this, and
what
they
percent?
define that as 30% of your monthly income means your house burden. What is your household income and what is your rent?
I don't think the business owner, you're asking the
This
business
is
owner?
No, this is number 6,
Well, this is number
No,
5
number-
on business owners.
On survey 5 business owners.
Oh, well, maybe we should take out number 5 on business owners.
Yes, I think we just need to strike that one. They don't have a way to answer that.
What do we think?
I mean, it's important to know, but I don't think they're gonna be able to answer it.
It's not their responsibility.
It's
is
really
what
their
we're saying.
guess.
It is
It
totally
would
a
be
guess.
I
It's
think
not
it's a guess, and I
relu-
think
Yeah.
with number 6, we're asking individually,
Yeah.
so there's
Yeah, you're
no
getting
need
it
for
there.
Maybe we should
Yes.
take out number 2.
I'm talking about the whole survey.
Oh, just take
Oh,
out
just take
all-
out the whole business owner survey?
I don't know if I,
So, all right, so what parts, tell me what specifically
I don't
you
know
take out.
necessarily if 5 is, you'd keep it in, or number 2, because what does it matter how many
Number
they
ones
employ
are
if
relevant.
some might live here and some might not, but also some might be able to work from home.
well, let's think about how many businesses, most of them are gonna be something in the relationship with tourism, right? So it's gonna be mostly hospitality and, you know, boutique shops and whatnot, or, you know what I mean? So I think it'd be interesting to know, okay, I employ 6 people, 2 of them live on the island, the rest of them don't. So that tells me that there's 4 people that may be interested in being closer to their job. I guess is kind of where.
Or maybe on the cusp of not being able to stay close to their job.
Correct. That's actually some other things. I definitely would take 5 out of that one, though. It's just not,
Yeah.
I would take 1 out. I don't think it matters how long they've
Yeah.
been in business.
I agree too.
Okay.
How many people, how many live on the island? Does average commute time matter?
I think if they feel like they
If
can
we're talking about
answer that
cost
question, you know, maybe you just do the
It depends on how.
Ranges.
1 to 3 miles and then, you know, 3 to
Mhm.
5. And then beyond that.
I know that it's an important question of my place of work, because the commute seems to be the daily, issue as to whether or not people will show up or not.
The
This
commute-
always comes back to the commute. Well, I couldn't because there was a wreck and took it, the commute seems to be an ongoing issue for.
You could just give a range.
Yeah, I would just break it into,
Yeah.
take a box for
All right, so taking 5 out for business owners, anything else? And taking 1 out,
taking 1 out, taking 5 out, and then
and the ranges for the.
I also be interested, and I'm not gonna word it right out of my mouth, but something about would affordable housing on Folly help you recruit talent? Or help you recruit and retain?
Yes, across the board.
I would think so,
Everybody.
but like, you know what? You might hear people say, I don't really have that problem, you know, or it's not a decision for me.
Well, I
I mean,
guess
we-
you're kind of asking that with number 6, is would you be willing to participate in affordable housing?
That's
If you
true.
say yes, then they think it would allow them, maybe, like, so maybe you could read into it a little bit if you get yeses or nos.
True.
Well, it says, would your business benefit if
There's
the
no
city
laws.
offered-"
I mean, why wouldn't they want to participate?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
participating in an affordable
participating-
housing program might
Participating.
make them sign up to pay
Paying
out.
for it are 2 different things.
Right, I was gonna say participate and
Yeah.
want the city to do it, or.
Yeah.
This one here is Folly Beach offers.
If you
Well, it says,
participate.
would you be willing to participate in an affordable housing or workhouse program? We don't have any of those developed yet, but in that program, we could say, in order to be a participant in this, the business owner needs to pay out this much, and then the city will match it, or whatever, the city will contribute. So it is a
That's an important question.
question that we'd need to know if they'd be willing
So
to
maybe just
match
say
or contribute.
match or contribute or something like that to.
Yeah, when you say participate. yeah, you
Participate
mean pay
is
into
like-
it.
Well,
can do
I think participate is
Yeah. Would you
a
be-
non-scary question. If you,
So are we talking about number 7, changing it, or is this adding another question?
I think if you say participate, then it could be defined later as to what participate means. If you ask them if they want to participate in paying out, they're gonna say no until they know all of the details, and we don't have all the details, so if you say participate, it's not scary.
Well, I think those are 2 different things, though. Would I love to encourage my employees to take advantage of a city-offered program that the city's paying for, or are you asking me to contribute from my business?
Well, that's
To
why
make
we
that
leave it
happen.
as willing to participate in an affordable housing, until we have that program worked out. They could say yes for many reasons, and it still wouldn't backfire on them. Saying yes could mean one thing, or saying yes could mean another.
What
And
if you
again, we just wanna know,
what if
would
you
you
just
be?
put like an asterisk by participate and kind of said, you know, like, you know, elaborated a little bit, like this may come in many ways, you know, whether you contribute, whether you just have employees or pay into it, we're still defining what this means, but, you know,
But that's where you might hook them into not wanting to answer that
I
question.
agree.
right.
Which then they don't have to.
I like it just how it is.
Okay, we'll leave it like that. And it's another one of those where
If you participate.
it's,
John wants
It
to
might
say
not-
something. Can we invite?
Just use the word initiative instead of all those you're talking about. Put initiative in. It means,
well, we're talking about the
The wording
the
of would you
misunderstanding
willingly
that it might be, would you participate or would you pay into and
well, yeah,
contribute?
you just, if you use the word initiative,
Participate in.
It's, the initiative is in there, it's would you participate in the initiative?
You're right, that's, we already have that word in there.
Would you participate in the initiative? I get it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna
You
work
can-
on
you work
this
on it.
one.
Okay.
I got it. Let's talk about workers on Valley Beach.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to participate in?
Same thing, I just.
Yeah. So this one gets to what is your commute time? I'll add ranges for that one. Would you consider moving? We could add ranges for that one too. This, I think somebody suggested those 2 miles for what would be,
I would definitely do the bullet points, like ranges for.
yeah, we'll do ranges for those.
Would you say within a 15 to 20 mile radius? I have to say that I think there's gonna be a lot of people that are in 15 to 20 miles that I don't think are gonna think that's a Folly Beach initiative. 15 miles is like Costco in West Ashley. Like, I think we need to, would you be consider moving?
15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes is very different. I mean, literally, think about how far, it's only
Depends on the day.
3 miles to, 4 miles to Rimble Road.
Costco's 9.5 miles.
The connector is,
Seriously, so I mean, I knew it was at
I'm
least,
Well,
so sure you know.
I knew it was at
the
least 10 or
connector
more.
is 7 miles.
Pardon?
So just,
I
the
think-
connector is 7 miles
Okay,
from
yeah.
here, so just to get.
So
anywhere
take out
off.
the 15 to 20 and say 5 mile radius, 1 mile radius. What do we want to say?
And I
there?
think we really need to know if somebody's understanding the difference between, we're trying to help you get closer to Folly or live on Folly? Because living just over the bridge and here is Folly, and that's what people think of. They don't think of living in sea glass apartments on James Island as living on Folly, so I think we,
And more importantly,
And this doesn't help with the
that's
commute.
not a resident that pays taxes that,
not taxes, because it'd be renters. Right?
well, they still they're still a resident of Valley. Yeah, they pay taxes in some realm.
Well,
Yeah.
like sales tax.
But with this, we're just trying to determine the cost burden number of people who work on the island
Mhm.
in particular. That's our only goal, really,
And,
on this one.
and how far they commute, if they could
Okay.
commute less, would they be willing to work, to participate in the program if it meant a smaller commute time?
Okay.
And I think it also is important to know, not how many bedrooms and bathrooms they have at the current residence doesn't matter to me as much as how many bedrooms and bathrooms do you need? Because you may,
Right.
Yeah,
That's-
is that next?
That's the third bullet under number 3.
okay, yeah, I guess I don't know if number 4 is necessary. Like how many they have now, wherever they are, we just need to know how many they need,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. That was
Yeah.
just from the rest of them, copied over.
And then on 5, I would do the brackets again because privacy, I guess.
Sure. And then number 6, I know this says rank 1 to 5. This was a submitted question that only had 2 answers, but then asked to rank them. So do you want to add something more to those, or do we take the ranking out and just say,
You could
What
put
is this?
in,
Somebody forgot to elaborate on
There's
that.
not, there's only one.
well, you could put in, getting some kind of assistance type thing
Mhm.
wherever you live, if you work on that kind of thing.
I think we should maybe either scratch that question or try again, huh?
Or just add that 1 to 3.
1 to 3.
What's the level of importance? I think you might want to also just add, get my cost of living down, or like reduce
Reducing.
my cost of living, because you may have someone that's here for 3 months. I don't know, bad example, but someone who can't afford to stay. They might be here right now and they just can't afford to stay, so, but if, back to the public safety people, right, $600 a month, that's just not enough for most people, so I don't know the right way to word it, but, you know, reduce my cost of living, something like that might be helpful.
Okay.
Jenna, I also think, did we already say on
Going
number?
back to number 5 here, it says,
Yeah.
city is interested in whether you pay more than 30% of your monthly income in housing. Isn't that sufficient? Why do I need to, why do I need to know what
Yeah.
their monthly income is or what their mortgage is?
Because
Well, it
people
would,
aren't gonna be able to figure this out.
Huh?
I think we're gonna have to do it for them.
but also, we wanna know the people who work on the island. That helps us with what the median income is, right?
Yeah,
Like
Not
we do,
really.
ne-
I mean, it
How
does,
else
but
are we
it's
gonna
kind
do
of
Of
it?
the
that.
workforce,
It's-
but not, okay.
instead of asking the 30% part, like, can we just ask 2 different questions? Optional, if you're willing to share, what is your monthly household income? X to X, X to X, X to X, click a box, and then what is your monthly rent or mortgage? Is it this range, that range? Then we can kind of just do our best to figure it out for them.
That's fine. The reason I did that was just to give them a reason why we're asking that. Why does it matter how much their income is? You know, I want to kind of explain it why we're asking.
Actually, I think that's a great idea. Maybe instead of asking that question, you could say the average, you know, income target is standard of living, whatever, I don't know the right words, but, and so we're asking this, so then, like, you can set it up instead of asking the question to set it up. I don't know, the city's interest is one thing, but why is the city interested, and where do we come up with 30%? I think just clarifying that a little bit better as to what's defined as affordable housing, what's average.
Gotcha.
One last category I thought of that I don't think we really are addressing, there's people who work on the island, but I think it's really fair to hear from the long-term renters who currently live on the island. Because there's a lot, and there has been a lot, but they don't all work on the island, they have businesses on the island, maybe they do work on the island, maybe they don't, but they've just been here for 20 years. I think that would be
Yeah, that's a good idea, 'cause
really helpful.
plenty of them are scared that they won't be able to continue living on the island.
1,000%.
Mhm. And I guess, would you ask, oh, never mind.
I would say, how long have you lived on the island? Do you work on the island? You know, how many?
Same as number 5, on
Bedrooms do you
people who
need?
work in the city. Find out about the 30% if we can.
Yep. You know, again, I think how many bedrooms do you and your family need, or something like that too? Because, again, you've got single people and you've got whole families. And I wouldn't be surprised, as long as it's anonymous, that we get really, because I think we say, what is it now? I think we need to say, what is your budget that you can afford to live on the island? Because there are people who pay $800,000 who always have paid that, and there's people who are really struggling to pay $2,500 and $3,000 now. So just honestly understanding, not just what you pay, but kind of what is your budget? You know, and somebody might say, I pay $1,000, but I could stay on the island for $1,500. Do you know what I mean?
Gotcha.
I think we'll be surprised at how many people live on the island that do work on the island, but maybe don't work in hospitality.
Yeah.
Or people that long-term rent that don't work on the island.
Yeah, I think so too. And those are gonna be people we see, I think, that we're gonna see have lived here the longest, or have lived here a long time. I have one more question on that one. What else do you wanna?
You can email me.
Okay.
Let's take until Friday. If you have any follow-up questions, if you think of something you want to add, clarify, or whatever, I'll give you until Friday, and then I'll start the survey out next week. We generally do a month to encourage more responses. So that means you will have the results back at the November meeting.
And what's our resource for pushing it out?
All of our standard ones,
Social
social media, the website, we'll mention it at council meetings, we'll put it on the sign, we'll put it in Sandsburg.
Stacy's list
Mhm.
perhaps,
We'll get it
all business.
Great.
So we scrapped, we didn't scrap any of them in the end, right?
We
The
scrapped
business-
a lot.
The business, no, I mean, this one
Not
whole
the
survey,
whole
we
one,
didn't scrap the
just
business
the-
owner one, we just scrapped.
Okay, so next meeting is October.
So,
So I will work up the tree suggestions, recommendations, and have that to vote on. And I'm not sure what we'll talk about for
are
this
we
long-term.
having a public hearing?
Do you want to do that? And we can talk after about
Okay,
what.
well, I just meant with no like agenda to make any decisions, but just to hear anyone who wants to come.
Okay.
If the email or survey is going out in another week, well, I guess that's only gonna be like 2 weeks before the next
It'll
meeting.
go out on the 16th,
So it'll be 2 weeks before the next meeting, so maybe
3 weeks. It's
Wait,
calendar
how long are we gonna leave the survey open?
month.
a month. But if we did a public hearing next month, it would just give anyone, like Mr. McFarland, who wants to come and make a comment and say, I have these ideas, or I have these questions, those kind of things.
Okay, so public hearing at October 7th meeting.
And nobody may
Yeah.
come, you never know, but, you know.
And we're always taking suggestions, or if they don't have to come in person to give their comments, they can also email me.
So what percentage do you think we're gonna get back on any survey you send out?
So, our average is about 200 people. So for something like the, what we should do with the new park, Juarez Park, that's over on Huron, we got about 220. That would, I think, be a maximum for all of these combined, would be my prediction. So the senior survey, 2 of those just went out, each one got over 200 people.
You got
Yeah, I bet.
200.
Yeah, I'm impressed that the senior one did, because the avenues to reach them aren't the same.
And it's
social
a
media.
smaller population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Is there a
Alright.
motion to adjourn?
We adjourn. Sorry, I have a very early morning